Good morning. This morning we're going to talk about evolution and diversity, specifically the evidence of evolution. The evidence we use to back up the evolutionary theory is by using fossil record and the geologic time scale. Well, hang on just a second. Sorry about that. But basically, we can look at the time scale, we look at the fossil record, and we look and see how far back in the time scale different forms of life go. If you'll see the little legend over here, you have this area here is the Precambrian. Then we have the Hadean era, the Proterozoic era, the Phanerozoic, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and finally the Cenozoic. These are the time frames that most of us are familiar with: the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. That's the age of the dinosaurs and the dinosaur-like creatures. But as you see, the theory is that there was some sort of ancestral life on Earth that, as it grew and advanced, branched off into these three different forms, and that's our three domains from earlier in the semester. You have domain bacteria, domain archaea, that's the ancient ones, the ones that live in those really, really extreme environments. And then you have domain eukaryote, which you and I are members of. As we move forward in the time frame, we have the Precambrian era again, and then we have all of these eras with their resulting fossils. But as you can see, as we move forward into the Phrenezoic era, then we have the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, Cenozoic. We are right now in the Cenozoic area. We're in the Quaternary period of the Cenozoic era. And you see they've got a nice picture of the space shuttle up here to show that this is the age of human civilization. If you go all the way back linearly, you start with the formation of the Earth, then you have the first bacteria and the archaea organisms formed, then sort of the pre-plant-like things, the first eukaryotes will form, and we continue to move upwards in the time scale. Again, here's the Mesozoic era with their Jurassic. We're all familiar with the Jurassic Park movies, showing the dinosaurs, again, moving forward to the age of mammals up until human civilization. Again, the evidence shows that something called common descent happens. And then Darwin put an extra little line on common descent. He added the word with modification, that all humans come from other humans, but as we move generation to generation to generation, those humans may change a little bit. As we mentioned earlier in the semester, they get taller, we're getting with better health. All of those things could be considered as an evolution of the human species. The study of past life, or the study of fossils, is called paleontology. Paleontology is a very broad field. Again, it is the study of past life. Whenever you talk about ologies, we're talking about life biology, herpetology, zoology, mammalogy. All of those are the studies of specific types of life. And people who study the ancient lives and fossils are called paleontologists. If you are a paleontologist who specializes in plants, for instance, you would be a paleobotanist. If you specialize in reptiles, you would be a paleoherpetologist. All different, but again, this is fossilized wood. There is fossil evidence of a fern-like organism. There is a fish. There is a triceratops. So all of these things we've all seen before in pictures and in museums. Fossils are very plentiful. Some people will tell you that there aren't that many fossils. Well, actually there are. You can find certain parts of the country where you can go and you can just find them readily. There is a creek out in Saline County where there is an area where the creek, and I'm not going to tell you where it is because it's on private property, and if you go running out there, the landowner will come out there and scream and holler and yell and possibly fire a gun at you. But there's an area where a portion of one of the creeks that runs through Saline County goes through a sort of hillside. And as you look on the side, there's this very crumbly rock surface. that literally you can just take a hammer and just kind of tap on the rocks a little bit, and the rocks start falling away. And as you tap those rocks away and start sifting down, you'll find all kinds of shark teeth. You can spend a day out there and probably find several dozen fossilized shark teeth. The fossil record is very well established. A fossil is considered anything to be over 10,000 years old. And we'll talk about how they or how it is possible to age things that used to be alive, such as plants. You can take I could take one of those shark teeth. Well, I can't personally, I don't have the equipment, but you can take one of those shark teeth, and by doing what is called a C14 analysis, you can tell how old that shark tooth actually is, or what you actually can tell is at what point the shark died or the tooth came out of the shark's mouth. Fossils provide us a collection of ancient remains. And again, you can find these all over the country. You can find marine fossils, very common in the central United States. There are all kinds of areas up in the Ozarks where you can find fossils. Again, if you ever were to take a geology class, for instance, at a 4-year institution, it may very well be that you might go out on a fossil hunting trip. You'll go out onto a lake bed or an old stream bed and look through the gravels and look for fossils, and you can find them quite readily. Transition fossils are those that link to demonstrate common ancestry. This is a fossil of a dinosaur. It was found, as I recall, in a gravel mine or gravel pit in Germany, I believe is where it was. This is an artist's rendering of what they believe the animal may have looked like in life. It is called Archaeopteryx or Proarchaeopteryx. From the analysis of this area here and this area here on the fossil, it can be determined that this animal had feathers. It can also be told by looking at the mouth and the head structure that it had a beak, much like modern day birds. And it has, however, a structure in this area that looks very much like those two-legged running dinosaurs, like, again, if you're a fan of the Jurassic Park movies, the velociraptors that had that stood up on their back feet and ran, kind of like an ostrich does today. They have a very similar hip structure. So it's sort of a transition. It's got some characteristics of the dinosaurs, and it's got other characteristics of birds. And that is what we call a transition fossil. The fossil record is incomplete. That's one of, again, those folks who want to argue about evolution say, talk about the incomplete fossil record. Yes, we agree and we accept that the fossil record is incomplete. And we know that, and we're able to deal with the fact that the fossil record is incomplete because there are enough fossils in most lineages to show, yeah, we have a gap here, but this is why we have this gap. Relative dating estimates, we estimate fossils by using rock layers. Again, this is probably the Grand Canyon. That's what they usually show. The older rock layers on the bottom, the newer rock layers on the top. Again, there are areas of the country where that can be problematic. You have to be careful that you look for uplift and things, like maybe the layers were laid down like this, but through uplift and earthquakes and things like that, the layers have been shifted. So you got to be careful. But in general, you're going to have, the farther down you go, the older things are going to be. Absolute dating uses chemistry. Here's that C14. Do not worry, I will not ask you to remember that the half-life of C14 is 5,730 years. Just know that the C14 has a half-life. Now, how does C14 dating work? All life on this planet is carbon-based. And we are constantly putting more carbon into our bodies. As we are eating and breathing and all the things we do every day, we are incorporating carbon into our body. And in the environment, carbon-14 and carbon-12 are found in a known ratio. And as long as I am alive and I am breathing and eating and going through all the processes of life, I am incorporating that ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 into my body. The moment I die and cease to function, that carbon-14, which throughout my entire life has been degrading, but it's been being replaced, stops being replaced, and the carbon-14 starts to degrade. The carbon-12 is stable. It doesn't change. The carbon-14 changes. So what we can do with something that was once living, such as a bone of this mammoth, we could take that. We know that the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12 should be this. We then measure the amount of carbon-14 that's in the bones of this animal, and we take the difference between the carbon that was there and the carbon that is there, and that tells us how many years has passed. If the ratio should be 2 to 1 and it's now 4 to 1, in other words, it's half of what it should have been, then we know that one half-life has passed. So that organism died 5,730 years ago. If an additional half has disappeared or has degraded, then it's been 2 half-lives. If an additional half has been 3 half-lives. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people will get confused about. I want to break this down as simply as I possibly can. When we talk about halves, how many halves are there in 10? Well, half of 10 is 5. But there's an old riddle that I was taught back in, oh golly, probably elementary school. I had a math teacher, and he told us, he asked the question, a frog is 10 feet from a fence or a pond. Each time the frog hops, he covers half the distance to the pond. How many times does the frog have to jump before he's in the pond? And Mr. Bradley sent us home with that question, and we came back the next day, and virtually everybody in the class said, 2. He's got to jump 2 times to get to the fence, to the pond. And of course, Mr. Bradley would say, wrong. And everybody would go, well, of course, Father. And then, smarty pants here, Mr. Russell, I said, Mr. Bradley, theoretically, the frog will never get to the pond. And Mr. Bradley said, correct, Mr. Russell, explain to your class what you mean. And I said, the question says each time the frog jumps, he covers half the distance. So the first time he jumps 5 feet. Now he's 5 feet from the pond. The next time he hops, he's only going to go 2.5 feet because that's half the distance to the pond. Now he's 2.5 feet from the pond. He's going to jump 1 1/4. And then he's going to jump to whatever 1.5 of 1 1/4 is and whatever half of that is. So theoretically, in theory, he will never get to the pond. That's the way this stuff works. You'll see these 3. This is in life. This is when the animal is living. There's these 3 dots here. Those represent the carbon-14. The animal dies. It stays dead for a while. Now we've only got 1. Therefore, 1, 2 half-lives have gone away. So in theory, there will always be some carbon-14 left. We know that there was at one time, 500 particles for every 10,000 particles of carbon-12. Well, now there's only 100, so we know that many half-lives have gone away. Biogeography is the study of the way things are spread around based on geography. The geographical barriers can play a role. Mountains, oceans, lots of different things. Here's island 1 here, island 2 here. And one of the most interesting things we have done over the past 125, 130 years is we have noticed that sometimes the vast difference between organisms living on this island and this island, however, the fossils on that island are very, very similar. That's another evidence of evolution. We've got these shells here that maybe are found on all of these islands, but these are some kind of gastropod. But now maybe the gastropods found on this island are very different than the gastropods found on this island, where however, the fossil gastropods are all the same. So at one point, these animals were very, very similar, but now they have diversified. The way we explain that is the theory of what is called plate tectonics. Plate tectonics tell us that at one time, the land masses of the Earth, about 280 to 200 million years ago, was all one big landmass. It was a big landmass called Pangaea. It was sometimes in some textbook is referred to as a supercontinent. Then approximately 181 million years ago or so, this giant landmass began to break up into 2 landmasses. You have Laurasia, which if you look very closely and use your imagination, you can see that this sort of looks like North America. You see there's Texas, there's Mexico, you don't see Florida much. And then this area over here is Europe and Asia. If you look very closely right there, that kind of looks like Italy. That's Laurasia. The larger of the 2 broke up continents, it was called Gondwana. Again, you will sometimes in some textbooks see it written as Gondwana land. In Gondwana land, if you look very carefully, you can see there's South America, there's Africa, and then you look down here, that's probably India right there, and then this is going to wind up eventually being Antarctica. As we move forward up until about the time of the age of the dinosaurs, when the dinosaurs were really kicking it, up until 65 million years ago when all the dinosaurs went extinct. You see North America here and South America separated. There is no Central America holding them together. There's Eurasia, again, Europe and Asia. You can see Spain, there's Italy, there's Africa, there's Madagascar, there's India, and then there's Australia beginning to break away from the Antarctic continent. And then today, we have North and South America joined by Central America. We have Africa. India has slammed into Asia and forced up the Himalaya mountains. There's Antarctica, and finally Australia and New Zealand and the areas of Malaysia. One of the interesting things, again, I told you that one of the most interesting things was how fossils tend to be in the same place. And if you look at the way, this is the way Gondwana land was originally assembled. Here you have South America, here's Africa, there's India, there's the Antarctic, and there's Australia. And you look, we've got 4 different organisms here. An early land reptile, a freshwater reptile, looks kind of like a crocodile. Another land reptile, and finally a plant. These are ferns. But if you'll notice, the fossils of this organism are found all through Central South America and then in Western Central Africa. But this fossil is only found here. But again, it's still found in both South America and Africa. Again, it's a freshwater reptile. This is a land reptile, so it was able to cross here through a narrow slit. This is a freshwater reptile, so that's telling us that this is probably a freshwater sea. It was able to swim between the 2. Looking at the plant, look at the plant. The plant is found in South America, through Africa, into India. It's been fossils have been found in ice cores on Antarctica, and it's even found in Australia. And then finally, this guy here Africa through India and into Antarctica as well. So, species distribution reveals evolutionary events. This is what's happening. This is how we're able to trace. And this is, again, how we're able to put the pieces back together that at one point, all of these land masses were together. And they weren't separated by oceans and thousands of miles. They were together. If they were separated by thousands of miles, there's no way this land reptile could have been found in both places. Another way biogeography can separate things is by some sort of demarcation. This is referred to as Wallace's line. It's a deep trench found in the Malaysian islands. So here we've got New Guinea, there's Borneo, there's Sumatra, there's Java, there's the Malay Peninsula, there's the Philippines, and there's a deep, very deep ocean trench running right here that is called Wallace's line. Animals on either side of this line, while they may fill the same niches in ecology, they are very, very different. Look at the different animals you see over here as opposed to the animals you see over here. There's Java, that's a bear. There's a bear found in Java. There's the Sumatran rhinoceros. There's another bear. There's a big cat. There's an elephant. That's an orangutan. Tigers, all kinds of big animals found. Whereas over here, we have a couple of deer species. There don't seem to be any deer over here. We have these small, sort of rodent-like creatures. They're actually not rodents. They're actually a type of monkey, a simian. But, you know, like I'm sure most of you have probably heard of sugar gliders. That's the sugar glider right there. And then you see the birds are very different. This is a bird called a cassowary, which is a very big bird, kind of like an ostrich. But again, notice you have these large animals over here, more medium-sized animals over here. So east of the line, you have sugar gliders, kangaroos, deer, cockatoos, honeysuckers, and brush turkeys. And over here, you have tigers, rhinoceroses, elephants, orangutans, leopards, bears, and different animals on the opposite sides of it. Because animals were over here evolved, animals over here evolved when this trench formed. Anatomical relationships. What are the relationships between organisms? We often look at what are called homologous structures, and I'm sure that's what the next slide is. Yes. So if you look at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 animals, these are all mammals, with the exception of the bird. The bird is not a mammal. Sorry about that. These are all vertebrates. They all have a backbone, and they all have what is referred to as a postangle tail. Yes, I know human beings don't have tails. We'll talk about that later. But they all have these very characteristic front limbs. If you look very closely at these, you will see there's a single bone from shoulder to elbow, and in each one of these it's pictured as being blue. And then there's 2 bones from elbow to wrist. You'll see they're pictured as being one purple and one red. Can't see it very well there, but it is there. You can see it there and there and there. Then you have the green, which is the wrist bones, which are right there, right there, right there, and right there. And then you have the phalanges, or the bones of the hand, or the digits, and you see them all following the same pattern. We refer to these things as homologous structures. Homologous structures are those structures that come from a common ancestor. All of these animals are vertebrates, so this is a pattern for the front limb or the upper limb of vertebrate animals. They develop differently over time. They develop for different uses. The human arm is for grasping and reaching. The front leg or front arm of the lion is for walking. Here we've got an arm that has been modified for flight, also for flight. This one is for swimming. So using the same pattern, the same bone structure, but we have organisms or structures that are very different in their function. Vestigial organs are those that are left behind by evolution, but don't have a purpose anymore. The examples we use here, moles. This is a mole, digs underground, tunnels underground. They have vestigial eyes. There is an eye there, but they don't see. Most moles are blind. The vestigial eye, you can see where the eye should be. Most moles do not have an eye if you examine them closely. Large snakes, like the pythons and boa constrictors, you will find hind limbs. You will find remnants of what was a hind limb. A very large boa constrictor, if you look toward their back, you can find a little claw on either side, which is a remnant of a leg. It's a vestigial rear leg. And then you have the whale ancestors, had the rear limb, used it for swimming. The modern day whales do not have that rear flipper. However, if you dissect one and you cut it open, you will find a bone structure within there, but it is encased in the body. It doesn't come outside. Analogous structures are those structures that have a superficial appearance or superficially similar, but they developed along a different line of evolution. These are cave organisms. This is a cave salamander. This is a cave crayfish. I don't know how well the picture shows up on the slides, but both of these things are very white in color. They have virtually no pigmentation. These little frills on this cave salamander are red, and they're red because that's where their blood supply is. It's how they're getting their oxygen. But right here and right here, if you look at these animals, they do not have eyes. They lost their eyes. They developed their analogous structures, their frills. And again, you can't see the crawfish's frills because they're under this structure called the carapace. But they each one have those gills to get, excuse me, their oxygen. They just don't have, they came from a different line of evolution. And then you have two different types of plants that have the same type of structure. You see these are very similar, although if you run a DNA analysis of these two plants, they are not very similar at all. They're very, very different. I'm going to put a pause on it today, and we will pick up with the rest of this chapter in a day or two. Thank you. Bye-bye.